Hello and welcome as everyone is coming in this evening. I'm Wendy Wharton, the Programs and Services Coordinator at the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library, and I'm really happy to be with everyone virtually this evening as the snow blows around outside. The Fireside Reading Series is the Friends' longest running program, and we're celebrating our 29th season in partnership with the Hamlin Midway Library. The Fireside Reading Series is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and our sponsors down Snelling Avenue, the Minnesota United Football Club, excuse me. Had we been in person, book sales would have been provided by Black Garnet this evening, and I still want to give them a shout out for having gotten books to me and being all around excellent human beings there on University Avenue, right across from Target. And so we are grateful for everyone who is supporting us this evening and has supported us throughout this series. We will begin with story time tonight. I love this. I'm really happy to be sharing a children's book that I fell in love with from the minute it arrived for Minnesota Book Awards nominees this last fall. It is now a finalist in the children's literature category. And I would love to introduce this evening's incredible collaborators. With us tonight, we have Diane Wilson, who is an award-winning writer, speaker, and editor. Her work includes Spirit Car, Journey to a Dakota Past, Beloved Child, A Dakota Way of Life, and The Seed Keeper, which won the Minnesota Book Award in 2021 in the novel category. Her essays have been featured in many publications. And Diane is a Mdewakanton descendant enrolled on the Rosebud Reservation. Sun Yung Shin is a Korean-American poet, fiction writer, nonfiction writer, editor, and educator. Her books include 4 poetry collections: The Wet Hex, which is a finalist in the poetry category in the Minnesota Book Awards this year, Unbearable Splendor, Rough and Savage, and Skirt Full of Black. Her poetry has been supported with fellowships and grants from the MacDowell Residency, the Archibald Bush Foundation, the McKnight Foundation, and the Minnesota State Arts Board. Shannon Gibney, who just disappeared, is a writer, educator, activist, there she is, and author of See No Color and Dream Country, which won the Minnesota Book Award. Both of those won the Minnesota Book Award for Young Adult Novel. Shannon is a teacher of English at Minneapolis College, and she's a Bush artist and McKnight Writing Fellow, and her new book that just came out explores themes of transracial adoption through speculative memoir. It's very, very fun. It's very good. Thank you. And John Coy is the author of young adult novels, the 4 for 4 middle grade series, and nonfiction and fiction picture books, including Hoop Genius, Game Changer, Their Great Gift, Dads, and If We Were Gone. He has received numerous awards for his work, including a Marion Vannet Ridgway Award, a Charlotte Zolotov Honor, a Bank Street College Best Book of the Year, and the Burr Rosella Award for Distinguished Achievement in Children's Literature. I got through it all. And now we'll get started with story time. I'm going to share my screen so everyone can see the beautiful illustrations in this book. And if I can find my slides. Here we are.
Han mitakiapi. An petukinde iushkian wachian kapia. Diane Wilson amakiapia. Mdewakanton oyate hamatahaya. Sichangu oyate ed omawapia. I hope it's really good to see all of you here tonight. Thank you, Wendy. I didn't mean to jump in over you. I just wanted to, before we began reading, offer an introduction in Dakota, which is our way of reminding ourselves and all of us tonight that we are gathered on Dakota land. And I also wanted to thank all of you for taking time to join us here tonight. And even though this is a lot of snow, from what I hear, even historic amounts, I always like to remember that the water that we're receiving tonight in the form of snow is such a blessing for the land, and that we've gone through times of drought in past years. And to think of all this beautiful water returning to our rivers and lakes and streams is just a gift. So with that, I think we are ready to read. We come from stardust, our bodies made of ancient elements.
We come from single cells evolving over billions of years, as did all life on Earth, bacteria, trees, animals.
I come from Minnesota, a land of forests and clear lakes, where cornfields remember a vast prairie, a sea of tall grass, home to bison, burrowing owls, and Dakota skipper butterflies.
Yeah, I think we unfortunately skipped a page, but that's okay. We can go to the next one, which is Sun Young's. Thank you.
I come from Korea, green mountains, black rocks, and cold springs, wet moss, giant frogs, and pine trees winding around shadows.
A city grown by the river. That's where I come from. Named for the stands of bur oak trees, this city called Ann Arbor is mine. Our stately old train station downtown sits not far from an arboretum with iris and peony gardens that spill into fern walks.
I come from the north. Wind whips snowy afternoons when dark comes early. From Minneapolis, a combination of Dakota and Greek words, waterfall city on the great river Mississippi.
I come from Hitunkakampi, old stories told in winter by the fire, passed down from countless generations. Unktomi the trickster helps us remember what the elders teach. To be Dakota, you must be a good relative.
I come from a long line of dark-haired women who washed rice, spun silk, and wrote poems. I come from stones and trees with spirits, Buddhist temples in the woods, nine-tailed fox folktales, tigers, and red-crowned cranes.
I come from people traveling, stories from two continents, one group in Ireland, the other somewhere in West Africa, planting and harvesting parsnips and barley, yam and okra.
I come from the animals, bear, boar, elk, and deer, who kept us alive long ago in Ireland and Scotland. I come from groves in the forest, bounty of nuts, berries, and mushrooms, and from standing stones, sacred spots for ceremonies.
I come from the breath of plants, the sweet sap of trees, roasted corn, first medicine water, parched wild rice, bison meat sizzling fat on hot coals, gifts from the land.
I come from 5,000 years of a people, kingdoms that rose and fell, an empire, movable metal type, and a native alphabet created so all the people could read and write.
White people called my ancestors slaves, dragging us to this country by force. We worked on enormous cotton plantations they thought they owned too. But the flourishing forests we runaways hidden also resisted.
I come from Gaelic speakers, sitting in a wide circle of stories, myths, and poetry. I come from a drum, the bodhrán, and bagpipes, flutes, and fiddles, songs sung at the céilí, deep into the night.
I come from a war in 1862 that forced us from our homeland, from the bones of our relatives, from the plants we knew. I come from grandparents forbidden to speak their language, ancestors forced to learn English at boarding schools.
I come from over 100 years of migration across the Pacific, first on the SS Gaelic to sugarcane plantations and pineapple farms in Hawaii.
I come from Black folks in Mississippi who loved the land but had to leave it behind to stand up, to find enough space for we who were coming. They journeyed to industrial cities in the north, crowding into tenement houses, working in factories and meat packing plants, all so the babies could finally reach and grow.
I come from the soil, potatoes planted each year until blight and famine forced families to flee. I come from ocean crossings, Cork to New York, Glasgow to Halifax, people packed in boats, praying for passage.
I come from my grandmother's garden, picking berries warm from the sun. My ancestors' prayers brought us home to the land where we have always lived. Now families dance at powwows, learn our language, and listen to the old stories once again.
I come from the Chicago skyline, chasing glowing fireflies at dusk, borrowing stacks of books from the neighborhood library and reading them by flashlight at night.
I come from backyard snow forts and snowball fights in the park, from sleepovers in the treehouse and s'mores in the fire pit, from parents who love each other but sometimes fight, and brothers who never back down from a dare.
I come from baseball diamonds, playground basketball courts, weekly library visits, and cross-country road trips, looking to the future, learning from the past.
We all come from stardust, sparks of light connected by story, creating a circle of past, present, and future, ancestors, families, and you.
What do the stars, the fields, and rivers sing to you? What stories does the wind whisper in your ear? The end.
Thank you. I absolutely love this book. So I'm so happy to hear it in your voices. And Rona, I'm surprised I'm not crying because I absolutely have cried reading this book. And friends in the audience, please put any questions you have in the chat, and I will start as you're thinking. I want to know where this project started for the four of you.
I hate to start.
But it was you.
Yeah, so you tell it though. You tell the story better. Shannon, you tell it.
A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. That's the wrong one. Sorry. Molly, you want to say hi to everyone? What do you think of the book? Okay. That's my 8-year-old daughter. John asked to meet with me and said that he had an idea for a project. And I'm always interested to hear about ideas for projects, particularly from somebody like John, who is so well established and knows what he's doing in this kidlit area much more than I do. So he told me that he had this draft of this children's picture book, and the concept was where I come from. But he told me he didn't like it in so many words. He said he had it under contract already with Carol. I always mess up her last name, so I'm hoping I didn't. Heinz. It's not Heinz. At at Lerner, who's a wonderful editor, and that they had been talking, and he had told her, I really think that this book is a book of many voices. It's not just one voice. What would you think about me approaching, some particular writers about if they would collaborate with me on that? And then, to her credit, not every editor would have said this. She was very excited, as I understand, about this. And so John reached out to me and to Diane and to SY. And then it wasn't long after that before the pandemic hit. We had one meeting, and then the pandemic hit, and we wrote most of it in this format, actually, over Zoom. It was like every week we got together and talked about the sections that were shared, and worked on our individual ones. And so that's my 2.5 cents, John.
Yeah, exactly. And we also have to say that Carol and Danielle came up with just an extraordinary illustrator for us in Dion MBD, who lives in Indonesia. And Dion said he was full, but when he read the text, he said, this is exactly the type of book I want to illustrate. And we're just so grateful for the stunning pictures that he made.
I do have a question about illustration, and since you brought it up, were there consultations around that, or did you just let Dion fly with it? Because it does tell itself in some ways, but
Well, he got a lot of feedback. Working with 4 writers who have very different stories to tell, and the fact that we were telling these individual stories across such large spans of time and complex history in different countries. I mean, this was a terrific challenge for for him to take on. So, but he seemed to welcome all of the feedback, and he was really invested in making sure that all of these illustrations were not just accurate to the times, but also so beautifully expressed the spirit of each story. So we couldn't have had a better collaborator on the visual side.
I can't actually unmute myself.
We're out of practice, Wendy.
We're out of practice. Like, what is happening right now? Certainly, again, please put questions that you have in the chat, but I strangely have, for a children's book, for a really complex children's book, I guess I have so many things, because it does so many things well. And I wonder what, I'd like to hear this. I'd like to hear from each of you on this one, but there's so much talk about not shying away from difficult material with children's lit, and this book does such a great job of addressing language loss and migration and slavery and forced migration and all of these things. And what do you think is important to understand about the way to approach these things with kids, and the way kids process the stuff that adults are like, especially white adults are, apparently loath to share with children? You want to start? John is next to me.
I'd like Sun Yung to start on this one.
Thanks, John. Oh, good question, Wendy. I mean, I think that one of the things that we wanted to accomplish with the book is, well, I'll say this as a when I had never heard of the term sugarcoat until I moved to Minnesota. And since I moved here and started hearing it, I've heard it a lot, especially from kids who've grown up in Minnesota. And I don't, it's not like a Minnesota invention of a term, but I've had, a lot of students over the many years talk about how whatever they learned in school generally was quote unquote sugar coated.
That's why it looks like, unfortunately, you're
Yep,
you're
you're frozen for
not
us.
with us. Yeah, anymore. I can kind of take over till she comes back.
Okay.
That's why and I kind of share a brain. So yeah. Oh, here she is.
Okay.
You there?
We
Me?
lost you there for a bit.
Yeah, we lost you for
That was, that was the critical race sensors from Florida. Anyway,
they
slow
got
to-
you.
It's the weather. It's a really, yeah. Like,
Mhm.
anyway, I'll stop there.
We missed the meat of your comment. Yeah. So I'll kind of take a stab and hopefully I also, the censors will not get me, but we'll see. I think, we really wanted to really tell the stories of our ancestry, whatever that meant to us, and what we knew of our individual stories. And I'm African American. Diane is Dakota. Sun Yung's Korean American. John is Scottish and Irish American. There's a lot of beauty certainly in those histories and those stories and experiences, but there's a lot of pain and sadness. Yeah. And so can you let her in, please? Yes. So we had to figure out how to get that in. And Diane, I've heard you talk very powerfully too about how it's sort of like, but you didn't want to just make it like the history of Dakota people getting oppressed by white people too, that you wanted to make sure that you really got like the culture in there too. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, it was really important to tell balanced stories, because sometimes there's so much emphasis on what the traumas have been and what has been displaced, and the ways in which communities are challenged. And it is critically important to remember our beautiful stories about where we come from, our creation stories, the foods that have been gifts to us for centuries, our relationship with the land and water, and that to put those out first, because, from my story, this is who Dakota people are. This is where we come from. This is our homeland. These are the foods that have helped us survive for centuries. But as part of that story, I think it's also really important to tell about the removal from Minnesota and also about boarding schools, because those two parts of history have had such a deep impact on Dakota people, but that there's also a lot of work happening now today to reclaim the languages and the indigenous foods and remember our stories. So I think that was one of the big challenges throughout the process of this book, was for all of us in telling balanced stories.
Yeah, Wendy, thanks for that question. I think one of the reasons I enjoy being around kids so much is I find kids are more open to some of the difficult aspects of what's happened sometimes than adults are. And I think one of the things we wanted to do with this was, to go back in the past. And for anybody, when you're going back in the past, you reach a point where you don't know, and you have to imagine it. And one of the exercises we wanted to do was, to think about what were our people doing 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. In this country, when white people talk about their history, it's usually very, very short, a few generations back. But there's a whole much, much longer history before that we often don't explore at all. And that when you do, you find out some of the ways people in Ireland were living 10,000 years ago are very, very different than how people live now and what they believed. And so we wanted to explore that. And I think when we were working together, we'd each see what the other person had written over the week. And it was a really strong incentive to improve what we were writing and what we were exploring, because I was seeing what 3 other talented writers were writing. And so that process, I think, was really helpful in arriving at what kind of story we wanted to write.
My daughter Maui has a question. I don't know if it's appropriate, but she's been rehearsing it for quite some time. What do you want to ask Maui?
How did you think of making this book?
Yeah, how did we make the book, right?
Yeah.
How did we come up with the idea?
Yeah, ideas of what you want to put in.
Well, there was this thing called the pandemic. And there were 4 writers who needed something to do in all those long hours at home. So fortunately, John had gathered us just minutes before everything shut down. And then we were meeting, I think, every week. Yeah. And then this is when, for some of us, the big learning curve began of how a prose writer used to thousands and thousands of words shrinks a story down into 300. And how long actually that can take, because that's a real challenge. But that's where I feel incredibly grateful to John for all his experience and encouragement and willingness to share his expertise, but also Shannon and Sun Yung as well. The opportunity to work alongside such talented writers, I think pushed all of us to bring our best storytelling into this project. I certainly felt both inspired and motivated I'd see what someone else wrote and I think, wow, I better go check my stuff and see if I can raise my level a bit. Does that help, Maui? I mean, everybody has their understanding of how it happened.
Yeah.
Did you also mean, honey, like how did we write it, and then how did it get to kind of get the illustrations and it become a book? Or you meant both?
Yeah.
The writing and the illustration?
Yeah.
How did that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. So we wrote it together on a shared document on the computer, and that took a long time. You probably don't remember, but it was at my grandpa's. Yeah. Something, right? And so then meeting with them too to talk about what we were doing, and then we were lighting it and trying to get it together. And then met with the people at the publishing house which makes the books, and they came up with some.
Wait, did you print the paper out?
No, that's what the published. That's.
And was it on the computer when you showed them it?
Right. We each opened it up on the computer, just like you do at school. Yeah. And then the people at the publishing house knew illustrators. Illustrators are the artists that draw. And they came up with a guy who was really, really good, who actually lives in another country called Indonesia. And then he came up with the pictures, and then they put the words with the pictures. Yeah.
And for a long time, Maui, we worked on our individual sections, and it wasn't until the end that we decided what happens when we mix those up, and then mix those up, and then we wrote both the beginning and the end together. And that was really fun because all four of us had to agree on every single word.
And bacteria, as it turns out, is really complex. And
Bacteria was I was like, that bacteria is staying in there. I don't care. Right? Yeah.
Good.
All of us had our thing. Somebody asked who the publisher is. It's Carl Hoda Lab, which is an imprint of Learner.
There was a great question about how you all envision this book being used in a classroom, which piggybacks on a question that I had really nicely. So I'm going to leave it at that one first. And Sun Yung, you want to go for it?
Yes, I'm just putting in the link to the book, and then, sorry, coming back. How do we see this book being used in the classroom? Well, we've done some, thank you for that question. We've done some school visits, and in the first one that we got to do, which was at Bancroft in Minneapolis, we got to work with classes for some time and do writing or even just illustration, doodling, exercises with students where they got to, we had various prompts for them that were related to some of the things that we wrote about, like food, family, history, ancestors. And so we read it to two large groups and then worked individually with classrooms. So we hope that classroom teachers really embrace it and embrace the possibilities for storytelling for students.
Yeah, and I think it fits, lots of teachers do units where they work on families. And one of the things we really wanted to explore in this book is there's lots of different families. And, some families know more about their history than others. And we wanted to make this open enough so that it included everybody.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that it does super well is leave that space for the unknowns and allow a student to connect at whatever, wherever they do know things. And that's really powerful.
Shannon, that makes me think about that young girl that came up to us at Beloit. If you want to share that story, that was so touching.
Yeah, so there was a young Black girl who came up to us. We had the opportunity to go to Beloit, Wisconsin, and visit some schools there, share the book with students there. And so after our reading and discussion with them, I think she was maybe about 10 or 11, this young Black girl came up to all of us, but really she was talking to me. Like, it was very clear. And she was like, thank you so much for writing and sharing books from diverse points of view, and she's just like, yeah, I think she was like, it's just not something that we hear that much, and it was just so touching. Like it was just, like, especially for me, just like, okay, she heard what we were saying, she heard the story of my Black family and Black ancestors, and felt seen in some important ways by that. Yeah. So I think that there's there's so many different ways that the book can be used in schools and in classrooms. When we went to Maui School at Bancroft, yeah, we had them also do you remember that? We did the
yes, I think we wrote like you wrote like a book thingy.
yeah, right. But it was like where I come from, and you guys could decide. It was just like 2 pages or something, and you could decide sort of how you wanted to do that.
I remember.
Yeah, and illustrating it.
It was kind of fun. It was kind of fun. because I think we had to do our best handwriting. And then when you do the best handwriting, everyone's like,
Yeah.
There's a question here in the chat that might be near and dear to several hearts on this panel. How would you work with children who are adopted and may know only a little of their story?
Well, we really think the same way, because as John said, a lot of people, regardless of their immediate family, may not know very much history. And, I really appreciate John's perspective. I think that one of the big tasks of white America in terms of anti-racism is healing this ahistorical approach. And so for John to create the continuity that he did in his poems or pieces, all of the, it's, oh my gosh, I'm really having a hard time today with the words. It's like this, the blizzard of the mind. Anyway, yeah, so we did, in talking with a number of students, I also asked groups like, oh, do you know anyone who's adopted or who's in has a foster family? Some kids don't have families really, or have access to them, and that this book is one book that can be a way for young readers or any reader to understand that the history goes back to bacteria, like that no matter what you know or don't know, or what has been taken from you, that there's continuity and there's something that's healing in that.
Yeah, I mean, as a transracially adopted person myself, I mean, I think it's, adoption is not, sort of obviously part of the narrative, my narrative in the book. But I think sort of what SY is getting at, and John and Diane and just the book itself, is like, it's not a seamless narrative. Like it's never been a seamless narrative. It never will be a seamless narrative. And sort of that, at least from my perspective as a Black woman, like that is the project of white America. That is the project of, hegemony, which is very much part of children's literature, and this idea that like, yeah, oh, kids can't handle, the real history. They can't handle wholes. They can't handle things that are like non-linear. I mean, it really has been more adults. Most people who've read the book are very generous and connect with it. But, there's been a few people, well, I don't know what voice this is. I can't follow it. And it's all adults. That I've never heard that from a kid, So I mean, I just think like, yeah, I think what got me as a child, an adopted child, with these sort of like ancestry activities in school is like, oh, the family tree, right? Which is, it's this like activity that assumes that everybody has access to all this information in these very, close generations, as John's talking about, and which is a white assumption. I mean, not just white, but white, heterosexist, classist, like so many things, right? Yeah, and that's like the antithesis of what this book is doing.
So would this be a good moment for SY to read the back matter piece that you wrote, which is just speaks so eloquently to this question about where you come from, where we come from?
That would be great.
Feel like that was a voluntold.
Diane just
No.
did that,
Yeah.
and I
What I found, is that it's like kind of backfired because we still got asked that question, after our reading presentation and even me reading that long piece from the back, it didn't backfire because it gave me an opportunity to answer that question, which kind of wasn't really a question. It was a little bit more of a gotcha, but that's okay. I live for those. So the question that this person asked was, so how do I ask someone where they're from? Like, basically,
How do I make it okay?
yeah, are you telling me that I don't have that entitlement anymore? And, I'm shattered. So, I said, they'll tell you if they want you to know. And that was kind of the end of that conversation.
I still feel like it was a successful conversation because it was a mic drop moment, like even
yeah,
if
I said what I needed to say. So, I think I kind of feel like I'd rather, if people get the book, for them to read it on themselves, the back part. Yeah, I'm not trying to be difficult, although I am being difficult.
But yeah, read the back about, sort of like where we come from. There's a little paragraph in the back that's really beautiful that sort of explains some of these issues and the sort of like philosophy that sort of undergirds how we went about it.
Yeah. For me, I'm the immigrant of this quartet, and it's like obvious where I come from, like the country of East Asia, right? Like, so my orientation to that question, like Shannon, some people might be getting asked things like, what are you, like, what's your ethnic makeup? And then some people who are like clearly seem to be foreign in the nativist gaze, will be asked, where are you from? So if you want to know, buy the book. It's in the back.
Mm-hmm. And it is just a beautifully written statement that basically Sun Yung created, and we all said, "Oh, perfect."
all of the pieces in the back are really valuable. So yes, people do go out and buy this book. I would happily sell it to you if we were in person.
We're really proud of the back matter. Like, we worked really hard on the back matter. We love the back matter. Our wonderful editor, Carol Hins, is a back matter guru. So, fellow book nerds, rejoice if you do obtain the book or read the book on your own. We're there in the back matter with you, for sure.
There's a ton more like deep dive into the specific historical moments in each page.
We did a lot of fact checking, and so did our editorial team, and so did Dion.
And one other thing, that kind of emerged is, really huge thanks to Carol for being able to pivot and work on a project with 4 authors. And in so many arts, collaboration is just such a natural part of it. But with writing, sometimes it stays separate. And so this, I think, was such an example of collaboration producing a story that was different than what any of us would have done on our own. And I'm really grateful for Carol for being willing to say, yeah, we'll go with a 4-author picture book. And we've got this young illustrator in Indonesia who we think will be fantastic. And we're just thrilled with how it turned out.
I'm wondering, since we kind of keep circulating around the question a little bit, if you could talk a little about the way the editing process went, since you are a chorus of voices, but the tone of the book is so wonderfully consistent with the, from food experiences to travel experiences to the personal narratives. So it's, yeah, if you could talk about the editing, maybe Diane.
Well, I'm trying to think now. I mean, we spent a long time working on it ourselves, and then if I'm remembering, we began to share it first with Carol to get her opinion, and it went through a very lengthy editing process because there was it takes a lot of time and thought to massage a book like that into the right rhythm, and that all of those stories, once they began to be interwoven, then you're starting to look at, well, how do they resonate with each other? How do these pieces sound juxtaposed to other stories? And then how does it lay out in a picture book format? So it was a lot of editing. It was a lot of working with Carol, and I forget who our other editor was, but we went through a lot of time getting it all exactly right, because when the text is this short, then every single word and comma matter. So it was intense. That's how I remember it.
And also just figuring out like the different voices, and how is that going to be kind of represented through the words and sort of on the page, and and much later with the graphics, and then as John was saying, our shared sections as well. It's like looking back on it now, it's like, oh, hindsight's 2020. Of course we did it that way. But like as we were going through it, it's like, yeah, there were definitely periods where we're just like, how are we going to do this? This is not a small thing that we're trying to do, and certain things need to be prioritized, right? I mean, you can't get, basically millions of years of Earth history, and then going back generations of 4 different people, into a children's picture book. It's just a big, it's a monumental ask, and so I think that's also what attracted me to this project, because I was just like, how in the heck are we going to do this? I don't know. But I got excited when I thought about working with like really smart people with really big hearts who are really good writers on a project like this, because I had no idea what we were going to come up with, and then I always say, as the project went on and it started getting, more refined and and we started to understand more of what we were doing, then this is over months and months and months in the pandemic. And then, you start to see the outline of what you're doing, and then it's just like, oh my God, like this is, it's just like, it's so moving, and then you get the pictures back from the illustrator, and then that's another level of emotion. So it was just a very powerful and emotional process for me.
And, Diane touched on it. I was worried, when the sketches came in and we were asked to provide feedback, we all had a lot. And I was worried we were given too much to Dion, but then he later said that this was the best experience he'd ever had working on a book. And he so valued all that feedback. And so he was just such an ideal illustrator for this. And wish he could be here with us tonight, zooming in from Indonesia. We didn't think of that.
I also want to say, John Coy, he's like a Trojan horse. He seems really sweet, and he is. but he's like the sharpest knife in the drawer. He's extremely discerning as a writer, as an editor, as a reader of, our work. It was just really like artistically such a good experience, I think, for all of us to work with John as kind of our senior, for sure our senior children's lit author. He's got his 22nd book is coming out in next year, 2 years, and then a couple of years. And so that was that part of our internal editing process, and just through with the publishing process was really exciting. The other thing I wanted to say was that I learned in my first picture book that one of the important things, or the kind of maybe the reason for the medium, is to think of it as a visual medium, right? It's like almost to think about it more like a film than a book, and then what could be done with the illustration should be left out of the words. Like, we just really needed to be as minimal as possible. And so I focused on things that I thought, one, that people might not know about South Korea or Korean immigration to the US. I thought about tangible things that kids might think were interesting to look at, or to think about. So those were also parts of the creation and editing process.
Thank you. That was, yes, that really gets at that process of putting all of the pieces together. And I love what you were saying, Sun Yung, about viewing it as the pictures doing one thing and the words doing another, because I think that's one of the intangible things when you're reading a picture book, and you know that it's working, but you're not sure how. And then oh wait, it's both of these pieces. And it's a valuable thing to call out when you're. I know there are students in the audience tonight, because I had an exchange with an instructor today about recording. So anyway, hi Hamlin students, I know you're out there. But is there anything else? We're coming close to 8 o'clock. Is there anything else that any of you would like to say about this book, about the experience of it, about how it's been out in the world with this book before we wrap?
I'd like to just add a thank you to another editor, Jordan Taylor, who was involved early on and really helped expand what was possible. And she's an editor who I think we'll hear all kinds of things from, but Jordan was very helpful on this book as well.
I'll just say too that, it's really generous of Diane to let us, to let us partner with her, as guests occupiers here. And so that's just, I think, something to be, that I love for readers and people to think about. The Diane's thread is kind of the, in terms of the land that we're on being foundational to everything else.
And I like to think about we've done readings with groups of school children, we've done readings with families, and we also had an evening where it was a reading just to adults. And I have to say, I loved the fact that the four of us were sitting in front of the room with holding up our picture books and reading to adults who were all just so focused. They looked like children again being read to. And I thought, we never lose the joy of that experience. And my hope is that what this book can do, both for the children who read it, but also for the adults, is it reminds all of us just how important our stories are, are, how different they are, and that it's important to share them. So.
There was also a question here, how did you navigate through anger, rage, grief, sadness, joy, and beauty of this process as it relates to your lineages?
Thanks, Shannon.
And I mean,
I didn't want to
no,
know
that's
that. Thank
fine.
you.
That's fine. No, I mean, for me, it's like, that is part of just creating art, you know, is going to that place and those places. And with a collaborative project like this, sometimes it's like, you know, you do it individually, and other times, you know, you definitely can do it collectively. I think the main thing is just feeling supported in that, however that looks. And I think for me is very powerful, you know, to also be working with, you know, women of color, Native women, you know, on this as well. And then of course John, who I knew also had my back too. And so it's not like we disagreed on things, but it's just sort of like, you know, yeah, we don't all come from the same histories or perspectives. But I know that I can trust every one of these folks here. And that's just about my relationship with them. And it kind of goes into what SY was talking about, with John being a Trojan horse. I would also call him like just like a master curator, you know, like he could have picked a lot of other people, you know, but he decided somehow, you know, that, you know, these were the people that he thought would be best for this project. And it ended up, you know, being a great experience, I think, for all of us. And then we're very proud of the book, you know, so, which doesn't always happen in collaborations, even if people like each other or respect each other's work. So I just feel an immense sense of gratitude, about the whole process personally.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all. I have an immense sense of gratitude to all of you for coming together on this, and for being here tonight with everyone. I always feel like I learn so much from all of you whenever I have the opportunity to be in the space with you. So thank you. Audience, thank you for your attention and all of the kind words that were popping up in the chat. We appreciate your presence and your good vibes. So next year, watch the Friends social media spaces for where Fireside will be. We're looking forward to a new Hamlin Midway library, but Fireside will go on. And so thank you, Peter, who is out there. And to Betsy and Ara and the wonderful Hamlin Midway staff. Just really love this series and my Midway neighborhood. I'm happy to have books here. It's great. So I'm done yammering. Thank you all very much. And have a very, very good night and stay warm.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you, Wendy.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you, Fireside. Thank you, friends. Thank you, everyone here. Stay safe.
Yes.